The story began with a beautiful ball where everyone had fun and danced. The music seemed to be coming from everywhere. After the song ended, the man thanked Her Majesty for the dance and bowed and left. Duke Adler came up behind her and asked if she liked the dance. The girl blushed a little. It was difficult for her to answer, but the man pressed her and in a threatening voice asked her if she liked it. She tried to explain that it was just a dance with the Archduke and tried to divert the conversation, so she wanted to move away, but she was stopped and asked to give another dance. The girl was shocked, but the Duke wanted to get an explanation from her why, after she confessed to him that she was in love at first sight, he saw her with someone else. The lady did not answer anything and spun around in the dance. He noticed that the girl didn't really understand what he was talking about, so he decided to press harder, saying that he couldn't stand the smell of others coming from her body. Immediately, there was a desire to kill them. Hearing this shocked her, but she hid her face so he didn't see it. The language was taken away, but there was something that she could not forget, because in this novel, she became a hit, and the man in front of her was a serial killer. The day she fell into an affair was the worst, because she still couldn't understand what had happened. On that day, her father announced that she would marry a duke, and the wedding would take place 6 months later. Hearing his name, the girl was very frightened because she remembered the introduction to the book, which she wanted to read the day before the transfer. It described Princess Charlotte as the 8th victim on her wedding night. In her previous life, the girl worked 5 days in a row without a single break, which ultimately led to her death. And now she has become the same heroine who also has to die. She kept thinking why exactly this happened to her, but suddenly she was distracted by the Duke. Approaching her, he said that it was a pleasure to meet her, especially for the first time in front of the Emperor. The girl, of course, was not happy about this acquaintance and used somewhat unfriendly wording about it, but the Emperor quickly silenced her by scolding the lady for her unfriendliness. He also strictly emphasized to her that she should not even think about marrying Archduke Kilian. Hearing this name, the lady could not understand who it was, but she could not give it away, so she quickly apologized. But the girl wanted to tell something more to explain everything, but her father did not even want to listen and warned that he would deprive her of the status of a princess if she dared to disobey his order. Charlotte again tried to raise her voice to explain everything, but her father again ignored her words and ordered the servants to take his daughter and future son-in-law out of the reception room and take them to the room to talk. In the end, they found themselves alone in a room where they had already served tea with sweets. They were sitting across from each other, but the conversation was still not going well. However, the lady noticed a change in the Duke's behavior. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to the newspaper lying on the table. The girl casually read the headline. It turned out that for the 3rd year in a row, Duke Adler took first place in the monthly newspaper Dream Man. Judging by the comments, the Duke was extremely rich and not deprived of intelligence. Everyone was interested only in who would be lucky enough to become his wife. The princess also knew about his talents, so she was not surprised by the hype. Finally, the boy spoke up and said that he knew about the lady's desire to marry someone else, but their marriage was arranged, so there was no point in seeing each other before the wedding. You don't even need meetings. The girl was wary because she knew that his words about the meeting on the wedding day only meant that he would kill her on that day. But no one would believe that such an outstanding person would be a murderer. In her past life, she was an inconspicuous anti-corruption prosecutor who plunged headlong into murder cases, so she promised herself that Charlotte wouldn't die this time. She had 6 months before the wedding, so she wanted to find all the evidence of the Duke's guilt herself. It was the only way out for her, and she will gather evidence by being next to him under the guise of dating. While the Duke calmly drank tea, the girl decided to start acting right now. She called him and, assuming an innocent pose, announced that she fell in love with him at first sight and offered to meet. The boy was stunned by this news. Wiping the tea from his chin, he clarified what the girl meant. The lady smiled and repeated the words, relying on the fact that she wanted the marriage to be not based on calculation, but on love. However, this made the boy somewhat angry, because he was not going to believe it. Charlotte had been begging for permission to marry the Archduke since morning, and anyone knew that she had even made a protest to the Emperor. This strange man was mentioned for the 2nd time today. First, he was recalled by the Emperor, and now by the Duke. He seemed to know of her unrequited love and that Callian was not interested in it. The princess guessed that this trick didn't work, so she tried to pretend that the Duke's beauty had taken her out of her mind, saying that she fell in love quickly, but he was not impressed. In confirmation of her words, the girl showed the newspaper to the Duke and informed him that he was the most jealous groom in the Empire, so of course she wanted to meet him. The Emperor entered the room. The princess rushed to her father, thanking him for bringing her to the Duke. The lady said that she is ready to see the bridegroom at least every day. The Emperor was pleasantly surprised that his daughter fell head over heels in love. After that, he turned to Adler and asked him to take care of his daughter. The Duke was somewhat surprised by what he heard, and His Majesty noticed it, but after clarification, he exhaled in agreement. Evening began to fall on the street, and the princess sat in her room in front of the mirror, carefully studying herself. The maid entered the room quietly. Getting a little closer, she stuttered to Milady. The princess paid attention to this. She understood that she knew nothing about her heroine because she had only read the introduction to the novel, which said that the princess was quite capricious. She needed more information about what was happening now. Returning to the maid, the first thing she decided to do was to get to know her, so she asked the servants her name. The girl was stunned. Gathering her strength, she said that her name was Martha Hudson. The princess clarified how long she had worked here, and the maid replied that she had been in this palace for 4 years, the lady thought. After a short silence, the princess asked her name. The maid thought that she had been scolded, that before that she had not addressed Milady properly, and quickly bowed, calling her by name. Martha did not raise her eyes and was already waiting for the punishment, but the princess turned to the mirror again, thinking only about why she had such a long name. The maid was frankly surprised. After some silence, the princess returned to the maid and confessed that she did not remember anything until today, and did not even know who she was. She exhaled heavily, hoping she looked real. The maid immediately bought into this and cried, because there was nothing strange about it. Milady staged a protest and did not eat anything for 2 whole days, because of which she became weak. No one even visited the princess. Charlotte was genuinely surprised by the maid's reaction. And it was even more surprising that Marta stayed with the princess for so long, because she understood that many of the servants had left because of her evil nature. Her Majesty reassured the girl, because she understood that she did not know anything about her illness, but asked to keep it a secret. In addition, it was very important for the princess that the maid was nearby. The girl beamed at what she heard and promised that from today she would take even more care of her mistress. After that, she thought, remembering that the princess also had signs of amnesia before that. Gradually, Charlotte managed to get more and more information about the real princess. It turned out that she was the daughter of the emperor's favorite concubine, who died at her birth. The emperor, who loved this woman very much, overcame the objections of many and officially made her a princess. And everything would be fine if she was well brought up, but after all, the emperor did not pay attention to her. The empress and their children with the emperor despised her. But what was there to say? Even the courtiers ignored her. She only had the status of a princess, but she did not have any support. During the conversation, she thought about it and asked the maids why she decided to go on hunger strike. Martha explained that in this way, the princess expressed her protest to the emperor because she wanted to marry the Archduke. However, Archduke Killian, with whom Charlotte was so in love, sincerely hated the girl for her bitchy character. She was surprised that despite this, the princess still decided to risk her life for this. It was clear that the power of such love was irresistible. But now the question arose as to why Duke Adler should marry such a capricious princess. She thought that he was given a weak spot. Finally, Charlotte calmed down and asked the maid to bring the newspapers from the previous week. Marta obeyed immediately. Fortunately, the mass media were well developed in this world. The girl carefully began to study each newspaper without letting any clue out of her eyes. In addition, she knew that serial murders were such a case, the progress of the investigation of which would be written about at least every day. In a couple of minutes, she found what she was looking for, namely information about the dead. At the moment, there were already 4 victims. Lady knew she needed more information before she became 8. While the maid was still bringing her newspapers, the princess rose sharply and said she needed an assistant. On the same day, the lady went to the prison. Marta wondered why Milady was looking for him among criminals. The girl replied that she herself, as a thief, should have looked for the same helper. The maid was shocked by such an answer. In the end, they met with the warden of the prison, who was the maid's cousin. The young man led them to one of the cells and ordered one of the prisoners to come out. The man obeyed and left. The warden warned the princess that this criminal had been arrested for attacking an aristocrat. However, Charlotte was not afraid. She asked that they be allocated a room for a short time because she wanted to talk to the criminal alone. Sitting on the chair, the man assured that he was not afraid of any torture. Before the lady wanted to stay with the criminal alone, the maid clarified whether the princess really wanted it, because the man was really dangerous and attacked someone who was higher than him in rank. But despite all the persuasions of the maid, the princess firmly decided that she wanted to stay with the attacker alone, because she had something to talk about with him. They were taken to a separate room, and the lady spoke first. The girl did not want to waste extra time, so she immediately announced that she wanted to buy Mr. Watson's loyalty. The man was stunned by this. He could not understand what the princess meant. Milady explained that she was ready to post a bond for him and become his guarantor. The man was wary because he did not understand why the princess needed him, and immediately announced that he was not going to become her toy. Charlotte stood up and, slowly approaching the criminal, announced that she would do all this for a reason. Instead, she wanted his help in an investigation she wanted to conduct personally. The man asked why she chose him for this role. The princess revealed that she knew of his past occupation, as he was an imperial investigator. She promised him a hefty salary for it. She also promised to make him a servant in her palace, so he will have a roof over his head. However, the most important trump card was that the lady promised to pay for his mother's treatment. Watson agreed. The next place the princess wanted to visit was the library. In the reception room, the librarian got up when he noticed Her Majesty standing in the doorway. The lady greeted, saying that she would visit more often. The young man began to stammer while answering her. The princess did not have time for chatter, but immediately handed the employee a note in which she wrote all the books she would need. In a while, he collected everything. There was quite a pile of books, among which was everything about the history of the empire, everything about ancient families, as well as legislation. In the past, the lady was very hardworking, so even now she diligently studied everything. Among the books, she spent more than one night in a row, but already in 2 days, she realized that her body was very sore and everything hurt. Her current shell was weaker than the previous one. The servants announced Watson's arrival. The man approached, saying that there was no point in such a formal conversation, because he was only her servant. The princess decided to get right down to business and handed him a piece of paper, which she then ordered to be burned. He read carefully and immediately turned to the lady, realizing that she wanted to gather information about the recent murders. She needed it because she knew that serial murders were different from ordinary ones. Unlike disposable ones, serial ones differed in that they had unique characteristics that could tell about the killer. A maid ran into the room and reported that the emperor was preparing breakfast. She was informed that she must also be present at it. Hearing this, Marta was shocked. The princess did not really understand what kind of breakfast we were talking about, but she was quickly told everything. The emperor spent secular breakfasts for a reason. They were attended by ministers and other public figures. The real goal was to determine which of the children was capable of becoming the next heir. It was not at all surprising that Charlotte attended such breakfasts very familiarly, because she was considered most unsuitable for such a role. The girl was extremely shocked by this, because it was not part of her plans. However, the maid quickly insisted on her presence, because if she proved herself well, then her palace could increase her fee, which was necessary, because there was almost no money left after hiring Watson. When she arrived, everyone had already gathered at the table. The emperor scolded his daughter for being late again. The lady apologized and sat down in her seat, saying that she was not immediately informed of the appointment. The emperor reprimanded again that her servants needed to be faster. Her brother and sister immediately started laughing at her for this. In the novel, it was these two who hated Charlotte the most. But now she was not the same princess, so she pretended that they had complimented her on the insults thrown at her. The brother and sister did not like this behavior of the older one and even annoyed them. However, both of them did not stop trying to pester their sister. After the emperor announced that Duke Adler was also present at the reception, Camilla laughed, saying that her sister's hunger strike was not in vain. The brother also tried to make fun of the sister about this and even involved the rest of the guests in it. There was a slight commotion at the table, but the princess paid no attention to it and even smiled. The sister, looking at Charlotte, hoped that even though this would affect her, she again showed no signs of offense, which irritated Camille even more. Instead, the princess looked at the Duke. He gave her a somewhat unpleasant look in return. The princess was also a little angry because of this, not understanding why this murderer was so angry at her. In a moment, the girl decided to laugh at him and winked. After a while, political conversations began at the table. It was about grain, the crops of which were much better this year. When everyone talked about their ideas, some of the guests asked Charlotte's thoughts. The brother and sister began to mock her again, not hoping that the sister would say anything good about it. The princess exhaled angrily. She came to this reception only by order, but everything started to get annoying. The girl reported that none of the ideas suited her. This caused dissonance at the table among everyone, and the lady explained that if grain was requisitioned for the army, it could cause the people to be indignant. The brother immediately jumped up from his seat and was seething with anger, but sat down without saying anything. The princess did not like his plan because he looked at the situation only from an economic point of view. After that, she turned to Camilla. The princess already liked her proposal more, because trade with neighboring countries was logical. But there was one nuance: the current political situation. The empire has increased its lands due to constant wars, and the vassal lands are constantly trying to regain sovereignty. More recently, there was an uprising, and the export of grain in such a case would be suicide. Sister had already thought that her plan was perfect, and therefore Charlotte had nothing to say, but she was wrong. The lady reported that neighboring countries can use the grain far from peaceful purposes. She took a cherry from the bowl and looked at it thoughtfully. After a moment, the lady continued and said that their seed could strengthen the enemy army, which would be a danger to the empire, so it would be a mistake. She stood up a little and said that she had a better idea, which was to abandon the cultivation of grains and give subsidies to farmers to grow vegetables and fruits. Then the demand would decrease by itself. After what was said, the princess smiled, glad that in her past life she had chosen economics as her second major. Camilla stood up sharply, clarifying how to grow vegetables where millet grew. But Charlotte had an answer to that too, and said that the largest fields could be planted with barley. Barley produced excellent malt, so it could be exported. The emperor liked this answer. The man did not expect that his daughter would be so advanced in this matter, and announced that the princess would now be present every week at such receptions. Her brothers and sister did not like it. When the reception finally ended, everyone left their seats and started walking towards the exit. Camilla, passing by her sister, deliberately pushed her and threw her, that she was just lucky today. The lady laughed. Nevertheless, she decided not to pay attention to the miscarriages of her relatives, because she had other plans today. She approached the Duke and reminded him that today they had a promised date. Sitting across from him, she noticed that this time his gaze was completely different. In the end, the girl decided to break the silence and clarified his full name, which also turned out to be quite large. She asked if she could call him Ren, short for Irenaeus, but the boy refused and also refused her suggestion to call her simply Charlotte. The lady was indignant, but did not show it. After that, the girl immediately asked if she could ask him a few questions, because she wanted to know more about him, not forgetting to remind her that she fell in love with him at first sight. The guy paid attention to this, and the lady openly complimented his look, to which he did not respond. In a moment, he said that he was ready to answer her questions and not hide anything. The lady clapped her hands in satisfaction and quickly took out a notebook with the desire to expose the murderer. The first question was to find out about his first love, but such a question surprised the Duke. He fell silent. Thus, her interrogation continued for some time, during which she learned a lot about him, namely something about his family, as well as about the death of his father for unknown reasons last year, hobbies, and other things. However, the Duke could not understand why she needed to know about his first love. The girl secretly answered that she wanted to know more about her husband. At her words, he clenched his hands angrily. She asked such questions for a reason, because first she wanted to know the motive of the murder and to understand why he killed his wife on their first wedding night. Maybe he already had a lover. And now the emperor wanted to force him to marry an unloved woman. She wanted to test this theory. The Duke suddenly turned to her, saying that she must have had a hard time in the past, but the lady let it all go. Right now, the only person on her mind was the Duke. And it was the pure truth, although not with the goal of making him fall in love with you, but with the goal of gathering information about him. The lady asked him to be more open. However, the Duke did not hide anything, because before that, he did not have a lover. The princess was sincerely surprised that she was the first in this, but Adler confirmed without seeing any problem in this. The girl still couldn't believe that the most jealous groom in the empire had no experience in relationships. Nevertheless, she did not say anything in her voice. The Duke, in turn, also wanted to ask a question. He said he had heard many times about her persistence. He wondered if this also applied to him. The lady understood that he meant the Archduke's obsession with the past Charlotte and was probably afraid. She thought that the Duke was clarifying this so that he would not be pursued and caught in the act. Adler continued and asked why the princess behaved like that and what was so special about him. He was a little stunned by this question, not knowing what to answer. The lady thought that the Duke wanted to clarify his good qualities in her. However, she didn't know what to say, so she continued about falling in love. However, he did not expect this answer, so he clarified when exactly the princess fell in love with him. The girl began to run her eyes so as not to meet his gaze. She urgently needed to come up with something. The only thing I managed to come up with was to give a bunch of compliments about his appearance. She did this with a deliberately admiring look, but the Duke was not impressed at all. After returning home, the girl fell exhausted on the bed. The maid noticed this and began to worry about her mistress. However, things did not wait, and Watson was already waiting for the return of the princess in the living room. She knew she had to go, but she didn't have the strength, so she asked the maid to bring her husband to her room. Martha was surprised by this, but the princess did not care, because her reputation was not shining anyway. In a moment, Watson was already in her room, and the princess apologized for such a delicate request. He ignored it and immediately handed her the documents she had asked for in the morning. The lady immediately accepted the package. The investigator managed to obtain copies of the investigation protocol, from which the lady learned that all 4 victims had one thing in common, namely that they were strangled. The same was waiting for her. However, that was not all. Next, the investigator reported that there is approximate information about the criminal's appearance. So he thought that the killer was about 180 centimeters tall, athletic, and well-trained. But a motive was also needed. Herzog fit the description of the killer's appearance, but he was not the only one with such a build, so external data and approximate calculations did not provide evidence of his guilt. Watson also said that this was all that was available to them at the moment, because the murders had already taken place a long time ago, and the bodies had already been buried. The princess shrugged her shoulders, and the investigator asked why she was interested in this. However, she could not tell him the truth, but the investigator did not insist and only asked if there would be more errands for him. Without thinking long, the lady asked him to gather all the information about the Duke. However, he didn't understand why, since Adler was the princess's fiancé, so she must have known him better, but he guessed that she was interested in his relationships with other women. The lady confirmed. She only asked him to conduct a secret investigation. John obeyed and bowed. When he left, the girl watched him through the window. The lady wanted to show her possessive nature on purpose. Meanwhile, the princess sent the Duke a letter again, which had just arrived at the addressee. The butler just brought it, and this is not the first letter. The princess sent them every day with a request to meet. This time, the Duke did answer the letter, and Martha quickly ran to hand it to her lady. The princess was even somewhat surprised by this, because Adler had ignored her letters, but this time he answered. The guy wrote that he would wait for her at the opera house. The princess was satisfied with this, because there was no need to ask the emperor to arrange a meeting for them. The maid was happy and led the lady to get ready. At the appointed time, the princess arrived at the opera house. The Duke went out to meet her. Charlotte again complimented him on his appearance, but the boy avoided an answer and silently went to his place. He bought a seat on the balcony from which he had an even better view of the performance. Adler said that it was difficult to get tickets for this show because it was very popular in the Empire. The lady was interested, but she only pretended to be interested. In fact, she did not like this situation very much because it was quite dark on the balcony, so she did not even see the expression on the Duke's face. She was forced to watch the opera. The girl tried to start a conversation, explaining that she preferred talking with him to watching the opera, but the Duke again ignored her, making every effort not to disturb him. Instead, he said that he is unable to see her every day because he has a busy schedule, but he would be able to spend time with her once a week. The princess gave a puppy dog look at this. Having given up, he thought that maybe he could do it even twice a week. The girl pretended to be very happy about it. Charlotte thought that would be enough, and next time she would take him somewhere quiet. Some time passed, and the princess did not even notice how she fell asleep, but woke up from being called. When she woke up, she realized that she had fallen asleep on his shoulder, and the Duke informed her that the performance had already ended. The girl almost jumped out of her seat and apologized to the Duke for her behavior, explaining that she had not been sleeping well for the last few days, and she herself could not believe that she had fallen asleep so carelessly on the killer's shoulder. Adler asked if he was the cause of her bad sleep, because the lady often wrote to him that she constantly dreamed of his face. The girl did not immediately understand what it was about, but she immediately agreed with him. Herzog said he would give her advance notice of meetings starting today, so I asked her to get some sleep before that. At that, he got up and went to the exit, announcing the end of the meeting. Several days have passed. The princess received an invitation letter to the debutante ball, and she asked Martha to read it. The maid obeyed and also reminded that the Archduke would also be there. However, the princess announced that she was no longer interested in Killian. At this, the maid thought that the princess was refusing to be present at the ball, which was being arranged by Earl Mostyn. The lady came to her senses. Hearing about the count, the princess asked the maid about it, and she answered that the man was arranging a ball in honor of his daughter Mary. Charlotte took the letter to read it again, noticing something interesting. The cycle of serial killings usually followed a certain trend, but in this case, the killings occurred without a temporal pattern. There had been no murders for 8 weeks, and she wondered why. The princess thought again. The first victim was Earl Mostyn's governess. Considering that before this there was no regularity in the sequence, it seemed that it was done as needed. Charlotte realized that the place of residence of the victim would help to find the clue to the killer's motives. The lady abruptly stood up, announcing that she had changed her mind and agreed to join the debutante ball. Martha said that at the ball, Milady would meet Killian for the first time since the engagement, but the princess again said that she was not interested in him. Suddenly, the maid got upset, saying that the lady had nothing to wear. The girl quickly opened her wardrobe and showed the maid that she had more than enough things, but the maid said that these things were not suitable for such an action, and now she understood why. After looking at all the outfits, she screamed. And the rest of the servants, hearing this, were not surprised that the princess, who had been quiet until now, started making noise again and even sympathized with Martha. All the dresses she had left were too provocative. The maid explained that the princess always only wore such to attract the attention of the Archduke, but now Charlotte was shocked by this. The princess found one white dress and thought it would fit, but the maid told her that she had already worn it recently to Baroness Irina's wedding and had even put a veil on it. Milady asked Martha why she didn't stop her then, but the maid answered that did not want to repeat the fate of one of the maids who tried to do it. The lady assumed that she had been fired. The princess said that she needed to buy a new dress quickly, but the maid said that there was no money left. The lady did not know what to do, and the maid got one dress that she would have to wear. As agreed, the Duke gave her as much time as possible. They were walking in the park, and the princess said that you shouldn't burden yourself, and you don't need to go with her to the debut ball. The Duke paused and asked for an explanation of her letter. The lady did not immediately understand what letter he was talking about, and Adler took it out to show it. Charlotte read and explained that she was describing her feelings. To which the boy once again clarified whether the princess really liked him that much. The lady answered in the affirmative, albeit a little brokenly. In a moment, she smiled and said that everyone already knows about her love for him. If this was true, then he did not understand why the princess did not want to go to the ball with him. The girl was a little upset because she thought that this would only make the Duke happy. The lady thought that he suspected something. The girl assured that she just didn't want to force him to do something he didn't want to do, but it wasn't like that for him. In addition, if he does not accompany her, he will cause a negative assessment. The lady admitted that in such a case she would only be glad of it. However, there was one more problem, and she asked if the Duke would mind if she exposed her chest a little with the help of the dress. Hearing this, the poor man coughed, immediately imagining it in his head. He didn't even want to think that the lady would show it to the whole nation, but she was having difficulties with money right now. Therefore, the princess herself would not really want to walk in these terrible dresses, but she had no other choice. The Duke made no reply to this, but turned and walked away without saying a word. The girl was upset because she thought that the Duke had started to consider her uncivilized again, which made him angry. The lady didn't say anything else either. With that, they left to prepare for the ball. However, before the ball, she still decided to get money to buy a decent dress. On this day, the lady again arrived for breakfast with the emperor. The guests had already gathered at the table and Charlotte sat down. She understood that even though she was a princess, the money allocated for her palace was extremely small, so with full determination she was ready to win the emperor's trust even more today. Adler sat opposite her and was even the first to say hello. But in a moment, her attention was drawn by the voice of her sister, who was screaming a lot, because a dish with nuts, to which she was allergic, was put on the table. No one else paid attention to this trouble, because one of the ministers announced the beginning of the discussion. Today, they were to discuss the effect of the disappearance of magic stones and wizards on the empire. Hearing this, the princess began to worry a lot, because no one had warned her that there was magic in this world. She tried to calm down and listen to the rest first, then she would come up with something. However, the girl was not given this opportunity, and the minister, having praised her for the last time, immediately asked her opinion about it. The lady was shocked, and all eyes immediately turned to her. The emperor gave her his word. She urgently needed to come up with something, but the words didn't come out when suddenly someone was heard falling, and everyone immediately turned their attention to the maid, who was writhing in pain, not even able to scream. All the guests looked after the servants with fear, but no one dared to approach. Charlotte was not confused and rushed to the maid and began to examine her. After finishing, she said not to touch the food. Everyone panicked and got confused. The princess immediately assessed that it could be a murder, but it was not like any of the previous ones. The Duke looked at her somewhat sadly. She noticed it, but realized that the Duke was beyond suspicion, for it was not his handwriting. Getting up, the girl reported that it was cyanide and someone tried to poison the participants of the social breakfast. Everyone present gathered in the corridor. A security guard approached Charlotte and informed her that a greater tragedy had been avoided thanks to her. He also reported that cyanide was found during the examination of powdered sugar. The princess breathed a sigh of relief, but in a moment she turned her attention to the servant who served the food and was poisoned. The girl immediately assumed that the chief suspect was the chef's assistant. However, the guard immediately reported that the assistant did not admit his guilt and kept saying that he did not know anything. The princess thought about it because she thought that it meant the fault of the chef himself. To this, the guard said that the head chef was not there today, but the princess paid attention to this because it was the chef who made the menu every week, and he alone was responsible for salt and sugar. She also knew that salt and sugar were very valuable in the empire, and the common assistant was not allowed to touch them. Charlotte offered to arrest the chef before he escaped. The guard immediately obeyed the order. The chef was caught at the border, where he naturally tried to leave the country. He turned out to be a Cortina spy and had moved to the palace a long time ago. Cortina became a vassal of the empire when it was conquered 7 years ago. From that moment on, rebellions against the empire broke out in it every now and then. And now their spy tried to poison the imperial family. With this action, he provoked 3 days of bloodshed in the palace. All those who did not notice any spies were executed, and as Charlotte herself expected, she managed to rise in her father's eyes. The emperor appreciated her contribution to this cause and doubled the payment for her palace. Although she initially planned everything differently, in the end she got what she wanted. She caught a thief, earned trust. Sitting in the library, the lady kept thinking about the completed plan. The girl did not even notice how it became dark in the yard, so she went home. It was scary to go so late alone, but I didn't think that something would happen. She suddenly realized that the chef might not be the only spy who wanted to end the imperial family. The girl looked back and sped up running, but tripped over a small stone. She quietly started calling for help, and John came out of the bushes and heard her voice. The man thought that someone was chasing her. The princess began to look around again, and the investigator gave her a hand. Hearing a rustle, she immediately leaned against Watson, trying to hide, but a small cat came out of the bushes, and the girl calmed down a little. The investigator took Milady to the palace. The investigator did not avoid the opportunity to laugh a little at the princess because she was afraid of an ordinary cat. The girl was indignant and replied that she just had a dream, but this did not silence her husband. In the end, the princess decided to go to the case so that the investigator told everything he had learned. They sat down at the table, and John immediately reported that everything was clean in the Duke's life. There was not even any gossip. However, his father's life was not so simple. Difficult family matters. 5 years ago, Irenaeus's own mother died of an illness, and now the Duchess von Adler was his stepmother. There was nothing special in the relationship between them, but the boy did not like his younger sister, Lady Blair, the only blood relative. The princess was still interested in why the Duke did not join the imperial army. The investigator replied that this information was known only to the Duke himself, but everyone around agreed that it was very strange. Because in Asgard, without service in the imperial army, it is impossible to achieve success. The princess thought about this, because she knew that the emperor wanted even more wars of aggression in the future, and therefore treated his soldiers very well. Therefore, it was even more suspicious. While she was thinking about it, Watson said that the first victim was Duke Adler's tutor. The princess was alert and immediately asked to provide her with all the details. The investigator laughed again. An hour ago, the girl was scared of a cat, to which the princess replied that she was afraid of something in the dark. The investigator said that as a princess, she should have been given an escort, but the lady said that she had dispersed everyone. The girl admitted that she did it because none of them looked like Killian. Hearing this, John burst out laughing again. The lady made an indignant face and said that she would be able to hire new ones. The investigator offered his candidacy for the role of bodyguard, and the princess thought that it was a good offer. The girl immediately decided to use it and took it with her to the store to choose a dress. Martha was quite surprised that the princess had hired an investigator to help with the selection, to which Charlotte immediately informed her that he had not received any payment for this. The maid was immediately happy about it. A salesman approached them and informed the princess that most of the dresses from their new collection had been sold out in honor of the debut ball. The princess and the maid were glad that they had time for at least something. The princess began to try on, and John and Martha had to help her with the choice. However, none of the dresses that she found were suitable for her, and the princess already began to give up. But finally the girl noticed one thing, and after trying it on caused an enthusiastic exclamation from the maid. The maid noticed that this blue dress suited her very well and was an almost perfect choice. The princess immediately asked the investigator for his opinion, and he blushed as he looked at the princess. The boy was at a loss for words to compliment the lady, so it turned out somewhat sparingly. The princess laughed a little. Watson approached her and told her that the princess should also eat better. Yesterday's wound still hasn't started to heal. The girl agreed, but assured him not to worry. The girl said that she was stronger than he thought. Returning to the cellar, the princess said that she would like to buy the dress in which she was dressed. The man said they would send him to the palace. When they left the salon, on the way to the carriage, the princess heard someone talking. Looking closer, she noticed several ladies sitting at the table and discussing her debut ball. One of the girls noticed the princess, and after her, the rest immediately started to get up to leave the place. But my lady did not let them do it, because how could she leave without even tasting a cup of tea with them? Charlotte chose to ignore the fact that they had discussed her earlier. The girl wanted to use the moment to find out something new about the lady, so she sat down at the table and started an innocent conversation. While the ladies were laughing merrily, the princess looked at each of them. She knew those for sure, because they were the daughters of the families that supported Camilla and forever pursued her as if they were her servants. The princess knew that they only agreed to tea with her because she was a princess, but she understood that they would not miss a moment to talk with her. The girls spoke for investment. Just as the princess wanted to ask what investments the ladies were talking about, one of them quickly stood up, relying on the fact that she had to hurry. The rest followed her, leaving Charlotte alone. Milady was somewhat disappointed that she had not been able to find out anything. The last of the girls also got up and wanted to say goodbye to the princess, apologizing for today, but Her Majesty stopped the young lady. The princess wanted to tell the girl not to even think of investing money in the perfume business that Lady Christina was talking about, because that was an unambiguous reason. The young lady did not understand why. Milady reported that where can there be big profits in a business that has not even opened yet? Besides, there is no material manifestation of this business, only the collection of finances. It was a scam. At this, the princess asked the girl to take her time, although she understood that it would be difficult for her to trust her. However, she promised to compensate everything, in case it turns out to be wrong. The girl was surprised. The young lady did not understand why all this happened to the princess, to which she only replied that she was informing about it because they were soon to become relatives. The Duke's younger sister was quite shocked by what she heard. Blair squeezed out a stingy thank you for that. The princess, in turn, asked the young lady to tell more about her brother the next time in gratitude for her advice, because she was very interested in him. The girl gave her word that she would tell. At this, the princess led the girl to her carriage and she drove home. While Milady was saying goodbye, a maid and an investigator approached her to check if everything was okay. On the day when the debut ball was supposed to be held, the dress she bought was brought to the princess's palace. When everyone came to check it, they noticed that the dress that she ordered had not arrived. At first, the friends thought that they had confused something in the store, but the princess assured them that this dress was too expensive to be confused. A letter was enclosed in the package with the dress, and Charlotte immediately began to read it. Martha was amazed by such a gift for the princess from the Duke, but she was only indignant that he was completely different when he was alone with her. Dressed in a new dress, Milady asked John to stay nearby. In the letter, the Duke said that he would expect the princess at 6 o'clock. Charlotte decided to come early, but she didn't have to wait long, and Irenaeus soon arrived himself to take her to the ball. Driving in the carriage, the Duke suddenly asked the princess for her opinion on his outfit. As always, the girl began to shower him with compliments, but in her mind, she wondered why Adler was behaving so strangely today. As soon as they arrived, everyone immediately noticed that the Duke and the princess were together. The girl understood that this was a great opportunity for gossip. Charlotte felt helpless and hoped that the groom would not let her down. On the way to the hall, she was met by the Marquis of Breguet and immediately turned to the Duke, because he would never have thought that he would meet an acquaintance here, because he rarely appeared at such events. The lady did not miss either. The boy soon noticed that it was the first time he had seen the princess in such a modest dress. Milady did not pay attention to this and answered in her own manner. The Marquis tried to discourage the girl about her new taste. He said that if he had only known that the emperor was looking for a bridegroom for his daughter, he would have personally proposed his candidacy. The princess smiled slyly, feeling sorry for the Marquis because he was late. The Marquis realized that he had failed to anger the princess, so he decided to swallow it. He immediately decided to take the Duke with him to talk a little. The princess had no choice but to agree. She herself sat down on separate chairs and began to look at everyone, because she understood that none of the guests put her in anything. She also noticed that it was her fiancé who stood out the most. She realized that she had no place among them all and tightened her dress. The girl thought that the previous Charlotte must have dressed so provocatively because no one paid attention to her. The lady laughed at herself because she'd only been in her new body for a few weeks, but she already felt sympathy for the heroine. Nevertheless, she was even glad that no one paid attention to her because she had some things to do. Walking down the corridor, she accidentally ran into the Archduke and stopped. She wanted to say hello to him, but the guy just gave her a disdainful look and quickly turned in another direction. The girl knew that Killian was not afraid of the imperial family, and therefore he never avoided the opportunity to publicly humiliate the princess, who was strongly attached to him at the time. So it would not be an exaggeration to say that the Archduke played the biggest role in society's ridicule of her. Therefore, she wanted to restore Charlotte's dignity, at least in his eyes. Milady raised her voice and told Killian that his behavior was unacceptable to the princess of this empire. The boy turned and angrily asked if the girl had decided to submit to the threats. To which the princess replied that it was only a warning, because next time she would regard his behavior as an insult to the crown. She finished with that, not wanting to waste any more of her time. She walked past the Archduke without paying him any further attention. The boy was very surprised by this behavior of the princess, because he had seen her like this for the first time. He didn't want to end this conversation so easily. However, the princess had nothing more to say to him and said she was engaged to Duke Adler, so Killian had no hope that she still had any feelings for him. Without any trace of conscience, she left the Archduke and went to the farthest room in the Earl of Mostyn's residence on the second floor. She opened the door, but noticed that the rooms had already been thoroughly cleaned. Thanks to a note from John, she was able to easily find this room. After walking a little further, the girl suddenly fell down and started coughing hard, but she remembered that it was an allergic reaction. She needed to get out of here quickly before her allergies started to progress. One of the maids suddenly called out from behind her. The girl quickly turned around and began to quickly think of what to answer. It was impossible to let it be known that Her Majesty was involved in the investigation of serial murders. However, the lady noticed that the maid did not really know that she was a princess. She needed to get out of this room without arousing suspicion, so the princess purposely became angry with the maid for not knowing who was in front of her. The girl bowed her head guiltily. In order to at least find out something, Charlotte clarified whether it was this maid who was responsible for cleaning this room and accused her of not doing her job well, because she was immediately overcome with hives. The maid almost fell to her feet apologizing, but reported that the hives had popped out most likely not because of the dust in the room, but because of the peaches growing nearby. The servant said that the previous inhabitant of the rooms liked to conduct experiments with peaches. It was even said that there was peach fluff in every crevice, and the cleaning maids complained about hives. Milady took note of this discovery, although she did not yet know if she would need it, because so far it looked like a detail about one of the victims. At this, she decided not to detain the maid any longer. Leaving the room and returning to the hall, the princess kept thinking about the peaches and how they could relate to the murderer, until she suddenly overheard someone's conversation in one of the rooms and stopped to listen. She went to the door and listened a little, but immediately returned, realizing that it was none of her business. But when she heard that it was Lady Blair, the Duke's younger sister, Charlotte stopped abruptly. The other ladies discussed the situation regarding the young lady, accusing the girl of betraying them. The princess understood that all this happened because of her and wanted to somehow prevent future trouble. Milady quickly entered the room and saw a cluster of ladies surrounding someone. She quickly asked what was the matter, and the girls instantly parted, revealing Princess Lady Blair in tears. To the princess's question, one of the girls sharply replied that it was not about the princess, but Charlotte was not lost and informed that Lady Blair would soon become her relative, so she was not going to back down. Lady Christina laughed at this, and sneaking a look at the befuddled lady, only said that not all princesses were equally strong, mocking the fact that these two would soon be related. However, this time too, the princess was not lost, knowing that the rest of the girls began to harass Lady Blair for not stooping to their level and not losing money to blackmail, calling them sods. The girls were outraged that the princess dared to call them names and warned her that she was overstepping the bounds, to which Charlotte also drew their attention to this, because they were taking out their anger on an innocent child. However, the ladies did not consider this to be a display of anger, because the young lady had promised them that she would invest in the matter together with them, but it turned out to be the other way around. Finally, Blair announced loudly that she had promised to think about it. However, the other girls were not surprised by her excuses. They only began to sew again what the young lady had learned from the one who changed men like gloves. But this time the lady bent the stick, and the princess angrily asked if she could answer for her words. Otherwise, it would be considered an insult to the crown. But the girl made an innocent look. She began to assure that she did not offend anyone because she did not say anyone's name. The lady laughed at this, realizing that the princess was offended by her words. Her laughter was supported by the other girls. Charlotte raised her head. The princess said that getting punished for disrespect is possible not only by legal means, to which the culprit showed that she was not afraid. Milady went to the table, took a bottle of wine, and took a swing. All the girls were immediately as if swept away by the wind when they thought that the princess had gone mad. After that, Milady turned to Lady Blair and said that she did not intend to hit anyone, she only wanted to scare her, and she succeeded. The young lady thanked the princess for her help and also for giving her good advice in protecting her money, because the case really turned out to be a fraud, the owner of which was a simple debtor. Charlotte blushed a little and said that it was not worth the thanks. Suddenly, she let go of the bottle of wine she'd been holding. The lady immediately rushed to the princess when Adler burst into the room. Irenaeus immediately rushed to them, noticing a broken bottle of wine. The younger sister immediately approached him, trying to explain that the princess did not want to harm her. The Duke said he saw the ladies his sister was friends with running from the room and also heard the sound of broken glass. The princess understood the situation, so she tried to explain everything. However, the Duke did not want to listen to the girl, expecting that she would feed him lies again, and did not want to believe her words because he himself saw the state of the room. The lady tried to explain again, but the Duke wouldn't let her even say a word. The final blow to her was his words that he had believed that something had begun to change in her. But now he was sure that people did not change so quickly. The princess exhaled heavily, trying to control her emotions. Looking at the Duke, she noticed that everything in him now said that he was not going to believe her unless she told, won't even try. She understood that if she had nothing more to say, she would still not listen. So without uttering a word, the princess left the room, leaving her relatives alone. Lady Blair tried to reach out to her brother. Charlotte stepped out into the cool of the night, tears welling up in her eyes. She only wanted to help, but she didn't take it the right way either. Perhaps the Duke's reason for killing her was just hatred. She trudged down the stairs with a blurred vision but did not even make out the road. John was already waiting for her at the exit, who was surprised that my lady was coming back so early and asked how the ball went. With a nonchalant look, the princess informed her that she had not danced, to which Watson merely shrugged. The investigator noticed that Milady was returning without the Duke's escort, so he told her to wait until he drove the carriage. Charlotte replied indignantly that it was better for them to go together, and the boy remembered that the princess was afraid of the dark and agreed to return together in order not to save her from the rabbit next time. Milady was again indignant and asked to stop mocking. The investigator laughed a little more, and then offered the lady to carry her if she was tired. She blushed, but agreed. The princess thought it might be difficult for the inquisitor, but he assured her that Milady was even easier than he expected. While he was carrying her to the carriage, the Duke came out on the stairs and saw them together. Charlotte shot him a look, only to be met with a cold response. She wasn't surprised by anything anymore, so she didn't pay any attention to it. John spoke, drawing her attention away from him. The boy said that the dress they chose together suited her much better. The princess had never heard compliments in her direction, so she was pleased to hear these words. She smiled gratefully. Several days passed after the unpleasant ball, and all these days my lady did not write a single letter to the Duke. The same thing happened today, to which Marta was very surprised and even began to worry about her lady. Suddenly, a worried Watson burst into the room. The investigator was very suffocated because the whole time he was running headlong towards the princess. The maid scolded the boy for indecency, but he ignored it. Charlotte calmly replied that she didn't have any plans, so she didn't need security today, but that wasn't what the investigator had come for. Having calmed down a little, he announced that the victim had been found at dawn. And he also said that most likely the princess knew this person. Milady covered her mouth in shock, trying to contain her emotions, because the fifth victim was the commander of Cortina, the Marquis of Breguet. The Adler family was distinguished by its wealth and position in the empire, The eldest son was called Irenaeus, abbreviated Rhenius. He inherited the best genes from his ideal parents and became a desirable bridegroom. However, the young man experienced misfortune early in his life. He was not interested in any relationship and ordered all letters with marriage proposals to be burned. But only the mother, seriously ill, asked not to do this. A doctor was always with her, but she asked him to leave her alone with her son. The woman told him that she was very worried that her son still had not found a girlfriend worthy of him. However, this did not bother the young man at the moment, because for him, his mother's health was in the first place, and marriage was in the second place, but the mother would still like to see her daughter-in-law before her death. Irenaeus fell in despair at his mother's bed, begging her not to talk about such things. He was sure that his mother would get better soon, but neither his nor his mother's wishes came true. As soon as the Duchess passed away, the children, who were still standing over their mother's grave, were introduced to their new mother, whom the Duke met once when he was still serving in Cortina. This made the boy very angry. He was more than sure that his father met this woman when his mother was still healthy. Everything was on fire from this, and so it happened that because of the death of his mother and the dishonor of his father, his heart froze. A few years later, his father also died. After this, the life of Rhenicus ended and the chapter of Duke Adler began, which was shrouded in nothing but darkness. However, one day the emperor turned to him. His Majesty proposed that they get married, and the boy had no choice but to agree. He could not go against the will of the emperor, although he did not like his bride very much. That is why he sees no reason for them to see each other until the wedding itself. For him, this marriage was only a matter of convenience, because he married only in order to preserve his rights to own mines. However, unexpectedly for him, the girl confessed that she fell in love at first sight. He was categorical about this because marriage itself was hateful to him, and she also wanted some kind of relationship. The guy was angry because of this, because if it weren't for the mines, he would have refused her. However, the further their meetings with the annoying princess went, the more she seemed to fall in love with him. All the compliments that she told him still began to make quite an impression, but most of all, it fell into his heart when the lady began to praise every detail of his appearance. He kept looking at himself in the mirror and really began to believe that this is how the princess saw him, and he even began to notice in himself the descriptions that she told him. He decided to say thank you. Without taking his eyes off the mirror for a moment, the Duke asked the butler if what he asked for was ready. The servant confirmed and said that he had bought premium class tickets to a show that the young ladies loved. At the performance, when the princess complimented him, the boy actually did not show his indifference to it, but on the contrary, simply tried to hide his face, which was reddened by her words. Irenaeus mistakenly believed that if these were premium class tickets, then the girl should have liked the show, but it turned out the other way around and she fell asleep. She was a woman without an iota of etiquette or restraint. The guy even got a little angry at this and promised himself that after this song he would take her empty head off his shoulder. However, song after song followed, and the Duke could not bring himself to do what he had promised. After all, he thought he wasn't a stranger to this princess, but after all, her fiancé, so it could hardly violate the rules of chastity. In addition, he realized that she did not sleep because of him. After that, every day until Lady Mostyn's debutante ball was a disaster for the Duke. He couldn't get that wink out of his head that the princess had given him at the social breakfast. He couldn't forget all the compliments she gave him. Sometimes the Duke repeated them like a mantra, and after a while, he even became addicted to the praise from the princess, rereading the letters. All of a sudden, the letters became more and more frank and bold. One day, a butler came to him to ask about the debut ball for Earl Mostyn's daughter, knowing that, most likely, the gentleman would not go. As expected, the Duke at first wanted to refuse, but one letter fell into his hands, after which Adler changed his mind in an instant, which greatly surprised the servant, which forced him to ask again. The Duke thought that the princess would definitely want to go to the ball with him as a couple. In a moment, the boy decided to ask the servant what it could mean if the girl wrote that she wanted to be alone with him. The butler thought for a while, but finally answered that in that case, the lady was implying that she would like some kind of secret meeting. But Alfred did not understand why the Duke was asking about it. Adler replied that it was for a friend. After that, Irenaeus decided to ask a question that was bothering him and asked what it meant when the girl said that her heart was on fire. The butler frowned and only told the Duke to be ready. After that, he let Alfred go, but he couldn't stop thinking about the words that the princess wrote to him in letters. He couldn't even concentrate on business, so he decided to meet her. He was determined to turn her down if she really was up to something indecent, but he wasn't prepared for the fact that the princess was somewhat dissuading him from attending the debutante ball. The Duke could not understand why the lady had changed her mind so quickly, for he was sure she liked him, to which the princess replied that she did not want to force him to do anything he did not want. This excuse surprised him, and he did not believe that she did not want to burden him just because he did not like such actions, so he told her that it might hurt his reputation. After that, he realized that from now on he needs to be more decisive in such matters. After that, the princess asked him about the dress with a neckline, which completely threw the boy off balance. Already in his residence, he confronted Alfred with the fact that she needed to buy a dress for the princess, which surprised the butler. But the Duke was not embarrassed by this because she was his bride. In addition, there was still very little time left before his rights to the mines were extended, so he thought that with this gift, he would be able to prove his loyalty to the crown. Dvoretsky listened and promised to take care of everything. However, before that, the Duke ordered a servant to show him all the dress designs. The boy couldn't admit to the servant that he was worried about the cleavage the lady was talking about. It was difficult to choose. In the end, Irenaeus decided to visit the city and go into some salon, in the hope that he would find the right thing there. As soon as he approached the store, an elegant dress immediately caught his eye. Alfred noticed how the Duke's eyes lit up, and the gentleman immediately went straight to the store. But in the salon, the dressmaker informed him that this dress had already been promised to another lady. Pan did not give up. He said that he is ready to buy it immediately. But the saleswoman still did not give in. Then the Duke even got a little angry, pointing out to the woman that she must have forgotten who was in front of her now. The woman even began to retreat, noticing the Duke's anger, but he suddenly said that he was ready to pay 3 times more for this dress and would pay the same for the fact that it stood a little longer. The saleswoman beamed. The Duke had decided to present this dress to the princess at a social breakfast, but that was when the trouble with the poisoning happened, because of which the palace was closed for some time and he could not meet her. He was very surprised that Charlotte became the main person in exposing the perpetrator. However, most of all, the fact that she looked for him in that confusion made her feel proud. On the day of the ball, when the princess wore the dress he had given her, he couldn't help but notice that he liked the fact that the dress didn't have anything superfluous. But he noticed that the lady was attracting too much attention. In the hall, when they met the Marquise of Breguet, the Duke was not too happy to meet him, because even from the academy he competed with him in any circumstances. Irenaeus did not like his false friendliness. When the Marquise announced that he would like to take the Duke away for a while, the boy himself hoped that the princess would not allow this to happen, but she was not against it at all, which greatly surprised him. In front of the rest of the distinguished guests, the Marquis began to boast that he had managed to take the Duke away from this nasty princess. The rest of the ladies and gentlemen also began to mock Her Majesty. All these discussions began to annoy the Duke, but suddenly he heard how one of the ladies began to say in a whisper that the dress in which the princess came had been taken by her from the daughters of Viscount Whitaker. The lady herself, from whom this particular dress was taken, began to look offended. The girl wanted to appear innocent and poor in the eyes of the rest, and everyone supported her even more, disdaining the princess herself. The lady began to tell that she had reserved that dress in advance, but the princess came to the salon and began to demand it for herself, so in the end she had to give it away. Everyone was shocked by what they heard. However, this story did not surprise the Duke, and he asked from whom Lady Whitaker heard about this dress. The girl replied that she was in that store herself and he himself would be surprised when he saw it. The Duke did not believe a single word and asked the lady if her words were true. His angry tone startled her a little, but she nevertheless began to quietly confirm the truth of her story. When he realized that the Viscount's daughter would continue to stand her ground, he publicly announced that he had bought that dress. The girl was speechless from surprise, to which the Duke repeated again. After that, he said that at that moment he did not see that the lady was present in the shop. Everyone around opened their mouths at what they heard, and the lady immediately began carelessly looking for excuses. She began to speak. That before that, she probably did not express herself correctly, and said that she heard all this from the shopkeeper. But the Duke said that the woman could not know for whom exactly that dress was bought. In the end, the girl had nothing more to say and realized that all her evidence was meaningless. The Duke, in turn, said that the lady had a talent for inventing a story with the dress that the princess was wearing. However, Whitaker did not want to appear so simple and reported that in any case she was the victim in this situation, because of the princess, she could not wear that dress. But the Duke knew one more detail. He knew that the lady had been paid to keep that dress on purpose, so if she was going to tell a lie, she had to do it more truthfully. The lady finally fell silent. Irenaeus now warned everyone that he would not spread false information about his bride. After these words, silence reigned around, and the Marquis rushed to defuse the situation by saying that the lady was wrong. Breguet also said that such stories were not without foundation, because everyone knew that almost every word of the princess was a lie, to which the Duke said that it was not for him to judge others, because he himself was engaged in dirty business. These words deeply affected the Marquis, but it was not possible to continue the conversation, because someone from the crowd announced the arrival of Archduke Kilian, and everyone immediately rushed to meet him. The Duke stayed. Only men remained, and one offered to raise their glasses. Suddenly, the Marquis began a conversation that the Archduke was too naive, because he could just take advantage of the girl who was so attached to him. Everyone around understood that it was about the princess, but the Marquis did not stop and continued that Kilian only refused the lady and did not even lay a finger on her, although who knew what happened between them. After he assumed that the Archduke could already have fun with his suitor in secret, there was the sound of broken glass. The Marquis looked at the Duke, meeting his murderous and almost insane gaze. Everyone was surprised at the Duke's reaction. Irenaeus wiped his hand from the champagne and threw a handkerchief at the feet of the Marquis, challenging him to a duel so that he would answer for his words. At this, the boy left them. He was disgusted to be with people who talked so dirty about the princess and the Archduke. But if it weren't for her, he wouldn't want to visit this place at all. However, he suddenly noticed them together. He paid attention to the fact that they were talking about something, but did not want to interrupt and went to retire to the balcony. The Duke began to think that the reason the lady didn't want to go to the ball with him was because of Kilian. He was troubled by the thought that perhaps the Marquis was right and the words of the princess were not true, so he began to doubt her confessions. But suddenly, he heard the voice of the frightened ladies behind him. The girls kept shouting that the princess had gone crazy, and the Duke, alarmed, ran to the room from where they ran away. He saw a picture of Charlotte standing with her sister, a broken bottle of wine lying next to her. After that, he could no longer contain himself from anger and did not understand what was happening, and insulting words flew in the direction of the princess, after which she silently left the room. When his anger subsided, his sister began to get angry. The young lady began to accuse her brother of such behavior towards the princess because she did not deserve it at all, but rather saved her, and the bottle broke by accident. The Duke was speechless at her words. He asked why the sister spoke about it only now, but she, with tears in her eyes, said that the brother did not allow a word to be inserted, pouring negativity on my lady. Now she won't be able to look her in the eye. He ran headlong after the princess to apologize for his words, but as soon as he got outside, he stopped when he saw that a stranger had already approached the lady and carried her in his arms to the carriage. He was speechless, and he just wanted to apologize for his act, but the last thing the Duke saw was the almost indifferent and somewhat forgiving look of the princess. So he was left standing alone. Several days have passed since the last event, but since then, letters from the princess have stopped arriving. The Duke was greatly disturbed by this, but he remembered again the words of his sister, who had shouted at him. Blair accused him of being cruel to the princess, so it was no wonder she avoided him. Irenaeus squeezed out a miserly smile because he wanted to see himself only at the wedding. He made himself think that he did not care about these letters and their absence, until suddenly Alfred burst into the office and announced that a letter had arrived from Charlotte. The Duke immediately raised his head. The letter said that the princess was under suspicion and was currently locked up. Hearing this, the Duke shuddered. He was speechless to say something. He got up and left the office. A few hours before the Duke ran out of the office, the princess and the investigator were sorting out the details of this crime. The killer decided to show himself again only 10 weeks after the last murder. John reported that, as in previous cases, the victim had been strangled, so police investigating the case assumed it was a serial killing. The princess clarified the details of the criminal. Watson replied that everything was as they had guessed, and more precisely, that the killer was at least 180 centimeters tall, and in addition, he must have been equal to the Marquis in strength, if not stronger. Lady forced herself to concentrate. Milady immediately asked where the body was found. The investigator replied that it was in Nowwood Lane. He also knew about this street from hearsay, because he grew up there, so he knew that it was not a place where aristocrats could walk. The princess also already knew that this street was Khrushchev, which teemed with criminals and homeless people who were a shadow on the ideal empire. After that, Charlotte clarified where the body was now. Milady asked the investigator if he would look strange if she personally goes to examine the body. John was surprised at this, but the lady insisted because she thought there might be some other evidence on the body. The guy immediately said that her interest could really arouse suspicion. Moreover, even he himself did not understand why the princess was still interested in this case. She asked not to ask about it. Suddenly, she asked if the investigators had their own prison cells, to which Watson nodded affirmatively, but did not understand why Charlotte needed it. The girl did not answer immediately, secretly smiling. Having pulled on a wig and put on the usual dress of a commoner, the princess asked the investigator if no one recognized her now. He replied, no one would have thought that a lady would walk in that lane. Next up was the plan itself, in which the princess was definitely going to be sent to prison. So she told John to stay close at all times and immediately follow them as soon as she was caught. The princess almost emptied a whole bottle of wine in one gulp, which made her immediately drunk. In half an hour, the lady was already in the precinct, where she was arrested for drunken hooliganism. The princess knew the laws of the empire well, because she had recently studied them thoroughly, so she knew that for such hooliganism a person was taken under guard. It will be easy to get out of such an arrest for a small bail. Also, it was the smallest crime, so the information should definitely not reach the emperor. To add a little fuel to the fire, the princess decided to make a fuss. The officer began scolding the young drunkard. The man warned her that if she continued in this spirit, it could end badly, because a murder had been committed today. The girl pretended that she did not understand what was being said. The officer admitted that the victim's body was now in the room next to them, and the girl smiled with satisfaction after learning the necessary information, but now it was necessary to get there. Charlotte rushed to the bars and started asking the policeman to let her go to the toilet. The man did not give in, and she threatened to do it right in the cell, for which he would be responsible. She hoped that it would work, but the officer did not react to it in any way and ordered only to be patient. The girl started shouting that the man did not know who was in front of him because the lady was like an escort. After that, the girl began to lift her skirt to prove that she can go to the toilet right in the cell. The officer eventually gave up and ordered the cell to be opened. As she walked down the corridor, the lady noticed a morgue. The policeman took her to the bathroom and immediately told her that he had to finish something regarding the investigation, so he told the girl to quickly finish things and go back to the place. She immediately agreed. When the officer disappeared behind the office door, the girl immediately ran to the morgue and went inside. A body covered with a sheet lay on the table, and she went to examine the dead Marquis. Looking more closely at the body, she noticed that the color of the skin was deathly pale, and it did not look like strangulation because she did not see any other marks. I couldn't believe it, that the Marquis did not defend himself in any way. However, reddish marks were clearly visible on other parts of the body. After thinking a little, Charlotte concluded that it was a reaction to poisoning, and the mark of strangulation was left on purpose. Returning back to the cell in the corridor, she accidentally ran into an investigator carrying a box. The boy showed her that these were physical evidence, namely the ropes used to strangle the victims. The policeman once again emphasized that it was because of this crime that they did not have time to play with people like her at the moment, so he asked her to return to the cell. John came to the prison to pick her up. However, it turned out that he would not be able to be her confidant, because the situation with him turned out to be different, because the investigator himself was under guard until recently. Charlotte nearly screamed in despair. Watson asked her if there was anyone else who could be asked to release her, but the girl had none. In addition, if the palace finds out about this incident, she could be deprived of her salary. The princess asked the investigator to send a letter to Duke Adler on her behalf. In a few hours, Irenaeus was at the site. He looked somewhat careless, but he wondered what had happened to the lady. After examining Charlotte, he noticed that she even wore a wig, to which the lady calmly replied that sometimes girls want to make a fuss. She asked him to release her and not talk about the status. The policemen were quite happy to see the Duke. While the boy was sorting through the documents, the girl said in her mind that in front of them was the same criminal whom everyone was so diligently looking for. In her opinion, it was a very strange situation, because the investigation into the murder was in full swing, and the murderer's fiancé was detained in the station, and he came as a trusted person.